Hello from Jihad and the World, a podcast that explores the connection between Western and Islamic cultures. The author is Mark Silinsky of Kensington Security Consulting, where we bring education to national security. Today, we examine Islamist infiltration in the United States military. We will profile several Army soldiers who killed or tried to kill their fellow American soldiers. We will also look at some Pentagon Jihadis who did not physically harm military personnel, but betrayed the country they swore to serve. Finally, we will try to make sense of the homicidal rampages and betrayals. Ali Mohammad. He has a lot of chutzpah, no question. Tom Corrigan of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, in reference to Ali Mohammad, the U.S. Army trainer for Al-Qaeda. Ali Mohammad, also often spelled Mohammed, was unquestionably the most well-known Islamist infiltrator in any U.S. military branch. Athletic, handsome, intelligent, charming, and treacherous, Mohammed served in the Egyptian army until he was discharged for aligning himself with an Islamic Brotherhood offshoot. As a soldier, he visited the United States during military exchanges, where he worked as a translator. Without steady employment, he moved to the U.S., married an American, and enlisted in the U.S. Army, where he served at Fort Bragg, giving lectures on Islamic culture among other duties. What is clear is his Islamist bona fides, which he earned through teaching martial arts and small unit tactics at Osama bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan. He also trained Islamists based in the U.S., in New York and New Jersey, one of whom was later convicted of murdering an American rabbi. Ali Mohammad's talent and intelligence starkly contrast with the U.S. government's and the U.S. Army's ineptitude and confusion about Islamism. Is Ali Mohammad professing his allegiance to Islam and his willingness to fight anyone, including Americans, who threaten Islam? S.G.T. Mohammed was openly contemptuous of Sadat, U.S. foreign policy, and Israel, and he freely spoke about the virtues of political Islam. If anyone questioned his commitment to the Islamist cause, they only needed to see him on a U.S. Army-produced television show. Although many soldiers familiar with Mohammed discussed his anti-American rants and dedication to the Islamist cause, they were wary of being labeled bigots if they brought up the issue. Additionally, many soldiers assumed that because Mohammed was teaching Islam courses at Fort Bragg, his Army superiors were aware of and approved his course content. Why else would they assign him to teach such a course? It's no surprise that many soldiers chose to remain silent. Hassan Akbar. Despite his academic qualifications, S.G.T. Hassan Akbar never became an officer. Born in difficult circumstances to a radical leftist father turned Muslim, Mark Fidel Cools, who changed his name to Hassan Akbar, left the mean streets of Los Angeles to study engineering at UC Davis. There, he was engaged in the small Muslim community and regularly attended MSA meetings. In the Army, he felt isolated and complained about being taunted. However, the teasing from fellow soldiers might have come from his odd behavior, not his Islamic faith. He acted unpredictably, doing karate chops spontaneously and blurting out angry, inappropriate comments, which made his fellow soldiers uncomfortable. He also unexpectedly and repeatedly fell asleep during training. Long before Akbar threw grenades into the tents of soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division's 326th Engineering Battalion, he wrote in his diary about killing Americans as an Islamic duty. His behavior was strange, but he could function as a soldier, if not a very good one. He also did not seem to have trouble telling fantasy from reality. Because of this, a court-martial convicted him and sentenced him to death. Akbar's defense lawyers argued he was too mentally ill to plan the attack. They claimed that, like his unpredictable karate chops, the grenade attack was spontaneous, which could reduce his sentence. but prosecutor Captain Robert McGovern said during closing arguments that his attack was carefully planned, entirely voluntary, and carried out with full knowledge that it was illegal. He, Akbar, sought maximum carnage. He achieved it, and, as a result, was sentenced to death. Nidal Hasan, the most notorious and deadly U.S. Islamist soldier, is Nidal Hasan, about whom we have a future 10-part podcast series. On the afternoon of November 5, 2009, the balding, portly 39-year-old U.S. Army Major Nidal Hasan walked into Fort Hood's Soldier Readiness Processing Center. Hidden in his clothing were an FN-57 pistol with green and red laser sights and a .357 revolver, which he carried as a backup weapon. Also concealed were nearly 24 magazines, each holding 20 rounds. His mission? To kill as many of his fellow American soldiers as possible in the name of Islam. Pentagon Jihadis. There have been other Islamists, whom Daniel Pipes calls the Pentagon Jihadis. They include Semi Osman, who served in both the U.S. Army and Navy Reserves, and was charged with providing material support for terrorists. Abdul Rahim al-Arshad Ali, a Marine convert to Islam, was charged with aiding Osman. Jeffrey Leon Battle, an Army member who converted to Islam, was convicted of terrorism-related charges. Hamad Abdur Rahim, who served in the Army, was convicted of using his military skills to train fellow Islamists for jihad. Hassan Abu Jihad, a naval communications specialist and convert to Islam, was convicted of aiding the Taliban. Yusuf Khalil Jackson, a civilian contractor for the DoD, admitted to producing fake military IDs and may have been involved in the counterinsurgency efforts in Afghanistan. Sadek Naji Ahmedan, an Air Force sergeant who was discharged for making statements condemning the U.S. and praising bin Laden, later worked as a baggage handler at an airport. Among the senior Islamist citizens is Rafat Jamal Maulawi, in his 50s, who served 12 years in the Navy and was later found with a small arsenal of weapons, passports indicating passage to Iran, extensive jihadist literature, and videotapes suggesting involvement in jihad, likely in the Balkans. These are only the known Islamists who have been arrested or convicted. Muslims not connected to the U.S. military have also targeted the armed forces. The recent killing of 2 airmen in Germany by a Muslim claiming to act in the name of Islam is an example. In the United States, a Muslim convert murdered a soldier at a recruiting station because he felt inspired by Islamic texts. He believed that America was at war with Islam. Abdul Hakim Mohammed explained, "I didn't know the soldiers personally, but yes, it was an attack of retaliation. And I feel that other attacks, not by people I know or me, but definitely Muslims in this country and elsewhere, are going to attack for doing those things they did, especially desecrating the Quran." What Quran are you reading? The textual concerns of Islam. Is there confusion about Islam within the armed forces? After the Fort Hood shooting, Major Bakar, the Marine Public Affairs Officer, questioned her fellow Marines who expressed concern about Islamic extremism, asking, "What Quran are you reading?" This is an important question because the Quran is one of Islam's key sacred texts and serves as the spiritual guide for Muslims worldwide. The Quran contains messages that God relayed to Mohammed, whom Muslims honor as the last prophet. Muslims strive to live in the way of Mohammed, whom they see as having achieved perfect living. Mohammed is the eternal role model for Muslims, including those serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. Do any elements in Islam's sacred text conflict with the principles of American laws and values, especially those of the U.S. military? The importance of the words in the Quran cannot be overstated, as Muslims believe it is the unchangeable truth of God, enduring, irrevocable, and non-negotiable. Certain verses in all major English translations of the Quran can present challenges for Muslims serving in the armed forces of predominantly non-Muslim countries. U.S. Muslim servicemen who killed or attempted to kill fellow non-Muslim servicemen were motivated by the words of the Quran. The Quran contains instructions that Muslims should not take non-believers as friends or allies. If interpreted literally, this command could weaken unity across all branches of service. Quran 5:51 states, "Taking the Jews and Christians as friends and allies. Whoever among you takes them for friends and allies, he is surely one of them. And let not the believers take for friends or helpers unbelievers rather than believers." There are many similar statements that highlight the clarity and importance of this message. These ideas conflict with efforts in the military to promote racial and religious understanding, and, in the case of the Army, to develop an army of one. Many passages in the Quran display contempt for both Jews and Christians. Other passages promise eternal hellfire for disbelievers. Quran 3:56 states, "As to those who reject faith, I will punish them with terrible agony in this world and in the hereafter, nor will they have anyone to help them." Other verses in the Quran insult Jews and Christians. Jews are described in a hadith as apes and pigs. Other elements in the Quran go far beyond restricting friendships between Muslims and non-Muslims, or promising that molten lava will be poured over infidels in a special hell reserved for them. More seriously, there are Islamic commands to kill those who threaten the Islamic community, and these commands are taken seriously and literally by Muslims worldwide. Quran 2:191-193 states, "And slay them, non-believers, wherever ye find them, and drive them out of the places whence they drove you out. For persecution of Muslims is worse than slaughter of non-believers, and fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is for Allah." In fact, the call to fight and kill enemies of Islam is a recurring theme throughout Islamic sacred texts. There are over 100 verses in the Quran alone that call for killing infidels and hypocrites, as well as for applying torture and enslavement. This raises security concerns for U.S. armed forces, because some Muslims believe in the literal interpretation of Islam's divine teachings texts. The hostility of Islam toward non-believers is common in the canonical texts of early Islam. Hostile elements in the Quran and the Hadiths have never been abrogated by leading Muslim scholars or respected institutions such as Al-Azhar University. In fact, the duty to engage in jihad has been consistently reinforced by Islamic scholars. Jihad is a term meaning warfare to defend Islam and expand the borders of the Islamic community. Only secondarily does jihad refer to spiritual struggle against internal impurities. Ibn Taymiyyah emphasized the obligatory Islamic hostility toward non-Muslims when he wrote that a Muslim is obligated to befriend a believer, even if he is oppressive and violent toward you, while he must be hostile to the infidel, even if he is liberal and kind to you. One of the most respected medieval Islamic scholars, Ibn Khaldun, stated that jihad is a religious duty because of the universal requirements of Islam. The calls to conquer and subjugate non-Muslims continued into the 20th century, with Islamist scholars and activists such as Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb, and Sayyid Abul Ala Maududi. There are other aspects of Islam that pose challenges for counterintelligence and security specialists in the U.S. Armed Forces. Military personnel responsible for granting security clearances, conducting investigations, and carrying out operations must ensure that all service members are honest and thorough in their statements. Taqiyya, or dissimulation, confounds Western security professionals because it is a long-standing and well-practiced tactic of deception. Muslims do not have blanket permission to lie. They may lie to protect the Islamic community or to reduce discord within it. This is taqiyya. Taqiyya is not a minor concept in Islam. Its practice is rooted in law and tradition. Islam does not necessarily lead to treason or murder within the U.S. military. Many murders have occurred in the U.S. Army, but only a few are related to Islam. However, there is a growing presence of anger towards Islam in the armed forces, which needs to be examined in light of Islamic texts and the rhetoric from Islamic leaders. 4 cases illustrate the influence of Islam on the U.S. Army and the resulting consequences. Hassan's loyalty to the United States had been questionable for years, despite the oath he took as a commissioned officer to support the United States and its Constitution. On forms asking for his nationality, he started listing himself as a Palestinian rather than American. Several times he posted hostile comments against the U.S. on online forums, and he was outspoken about his disdain for American foreign policy and world Jewry. Additionally, he brought politics into issues, social gatherings, and professional meetings where such topics would not normally arise. For example, while a resident physician at Walter Reed, he was supposed to present a paper on a psychiatric topic, but instead used his platform to speak out against anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States and to justify suicide bombings. His behavior, like that of Sergeant Mohammed, did not go unnoticed by his co-workers, some of whom grew suspicious and anxious. His fellow soldiers and doctors struggled to interpret or deal with his actions. The Army promotes religious inclusion and tolerance, and officers accused of insensitivity could face penalties during their annual reviews. On Hassan's business card, he had SOA printed, which he admitted meant Soldier of Allah. But in Islamic culture, did this symbolize disloyalty or something else? If deployed to a war zone where Americans were ordered to kill Muslims, how would he respond? He explored these questions at Fort Hood. Thank you for listening to this episode of Jihad and the World. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. If you have first-hand knowledge of Islamic infiltration in the U.S. Armed Forces, Dr. Silinsky would greatly appreciate your input. Our latest book, Cauldron of Terror, Hamas, Israel, and the World, will be available in July 2026. This podcast does not represent the official position of the United States government. Until next time, goodbye from Kensington Security Consulting.